Number 10. Superman vs. Batman. This fight doesn't even come from the main continuity, hailing instead from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns continuity of Earth 31. But it was so brutal that it was still incorporated into the main continuity of the DCEU at the time. Batman at this point in his story in this alternate world in the comics is not only still without superpowers, but he was also retired. When he decides to return from retirement, Superman is tasked with taking him out, ordered to do so by the president. But Batman isn't prepared to go down without a fight, and a bloody, brutal, and desperate battle ensues between these two heroes. At the end of the story, we later find out Batman seemingly won in his own smart way, typical Batman. While Batman seemingly dies during the fight, we later learn at the funeral that he is still alive and well, and that Clark may have even been in on this plan the whole time. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love it when we talk about brutal fights, be sure to check out our brutal playlist for even more content like this. Number 9. Batman vs. Green Lantern. For this point, we're not talking about Hal Jordan, but instead everyone's favorite Lantern, well, some people's favorite Lantern anyways, Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner is a Green Lantern who's been known to get on his teammates' nerves. At times, his cockiness is just too much for his fellow heroes, which seems to be the case here for Batman, who in his frustration referred to Gardner as a mongrel. Guy does not take kindly to this insult, and with tensions already having been built prior, he challenges Batman to a fight he is sure to lose considering he decides to remove his lantern ring to even the playing field. Batman accepts his challenge and knocks him out in one punch. Number 8. Bane vs. Batman. Probably one of the most famous fights in comic book history. In this fight, Batman is brutalized by Bane. Bane ends up escaping Arkham and decides to see how much havoc he can cause. When Batman ends up overwhelmed by the hordes of recently escaped criminals swarming the streets of Gotham, Bane takes this as an opportunity to strike. Run down and exhausted after 3 months of non-stop fighting with barely any time to rest, Batman is easily defeated by the villain, who famously breaks Batman's back over his knee. Though really the most impressive and brutal feat was honestly getting Batman to such a fragile point, which is not easy to do. Batman would recover from this and ultimately return, but it would take him quite some time to heal. In the interim, he'd be forced to call on someone to replace him, ultimately choosing Jean-Paul Valley's Azrael. Number 7. Dream vs. Karanzan. One of my favorite fights I have ever read in any book, comic or otherwise, happens of course in the Sandman series. This fight happens during the first main arc in the Sandman comic series, when Dream is tasked with reclaiming his symbols of office. In order to get back his helm in the comics, he must journey to Hell to battle and defeat the demon currently in possession of it, one of Beelzebub's, a demon named Karanzan. This battle is described as being the oldest game, that of basically imagining. One can lose through hesitation, inability to take up a solid defensive stance, or lack of imagination. Karanzan conjures up the anti-life in the hopes of finally beating Dream after a long fight. Initially badly beaten by Karanzan's move, Dream does end up winning in the end, proving himself the epitome of imagination, as what else are dreams really, by conjuring up the concept of hope. Number 6. Batman and Robin vs. Green Lantern. Oh boy, what can I say about this one? Well, it comes from Frank Miller's all-star Batman and Robin, so I think you can imagine how it goes. I will say Frank Miller is like the king of brutal fights, I would say, in comics. Yeah, all-star Batman and Robin is honestly, it's an experience. If you want to check it out, all the power to you. In issue number 9, Green Lantern comes to try and tell Batman he's taken things too far, warning him that he's putting people in danger and imploring him to please stop. Seemingly, Hal's house call is triggered specifically by the fact that he's accusing Batman of kidnapping Dick Grayson, who he does not know but suspects is Batman's sidekick, Robin. Batman doesn't want to hear it and blatantly denies Hal's accusations, even though, as we know, they are true. As we can see from the beginning of the issue, Batman has also been preparing for Hal's arrival and for this specific confrontation by painting everything yellow. Needless to say, it doesn't go well for Hal. Number 5. Bane vs. Alfred. What could possibly be worse than the loss of Batman's parents when he was young? How about the loss of his confidant, his butler, and the person who who, for longer even than his own parents, has honestly been a parental figure to him, Alfred. I don't think it gets much more brutal than this. While the death of Batman's parents is obviously very tragic, Alfred was there to help pick up the pieces afterwards and in essence helped to raise the boy even before his parents passed. He was probably one of the closest people to Batman. Alfred was shockingly killed by Bane after being kidnapped by the villain. When Damian Wayne didn't take Bane's threat seriously and set out to save Alfred, Bane responded in kind by ending Alfred's life. Not only is this brutal for Alfred, obviously, but this was all part of Bane's greater plan to basically break Batman again, but this time psychologically. Number 4. Joker versus Batman. Not just any Joker either for this point. We're talking about Emperor Joker. This is an extremely powerful version of the Joker if you aren't familiar with him. He basically gets 99.99% of Mr. Mixia's Pitilix power after tricking him out of it. Mr. Mixie was going to give Joker only 1%, but as I said, he was tricked out of basically almost all of his power instead, which is, I imagine, what would happen if you're trying to make a deal with the Joker. The Joker uses his newfound power to do a bunch of brutal things, one of which is tormenting Batman on a daily basis before killing him each and every day, only to resurrect him, bringing Batman back so he could of course do it all again. This was so traumatic for Batman that eventually when Superman does manage to use Batman's existence to basically defeat the Joker, restoring the world to normal, Superman is forced to take Batman's memories of the daily torment actually from his mind. Otherwise, Batman would actually have been unable to operate as a hero because this experience literally breaks him. Number 3. Superman versus Lois Lane. This one really is a brutal beatdown, and it's not one that's intentional, FYI. It's hard to read and honestly helps to justify most of Superman's actions, at least at the start of the Injustice Elseworld story. At the start of Injustice, Joker and Harley Quinn end up manipulating Superman into basically killing Lois, by making him think he's fighting Doomsday. In doing so, they not only have Lois killed, but also her and Superman's future offspring, and all of Metropolis gets blown up too. Unsurprisingly, Superman does not take this very well and ultimately becomes corrupted by the pain of all this loss. Number 2. Damian Wayne versus Damian Wayne. Batman has lost a lot of Robins over the years and a lot of adopted sons, but Damian Wayne is his biological heir, the son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul. He was raised by Talia and the League of Assassins without Batman even really knowing of his existence until years later when Talia just dropped him off on Bruce's doorstep. Initially, the two did not get along very well. Damian insisted on killing their enemies as he'd been trained to do his whole life. But eventually, he did come around and began to see the value in his father's approach to fighting crime, respecting it and even honestly admiring it. Just as their relationship began to evolve into something more resembling a true father-son connection, Damian was tragically killed by the Heretic, a death that Batman can't even bring himself to avenge when he realizes that the Heretic is Damian's clone. Number 1. Mera versus Aquaman. Mera and Aquaman are often presented as being romantic partners and sometimes as a crime-fighting Atlantean duo as well. However, this doesn't mean they never fight, especially when things get really comic booky. And during the Blackest Night, things did get really comic booky and they actually had some really good reason to fight. At that time, Aquaman had been possessed by the Black Lanterns, joining their forces, and Mera was driven into a rage by the death of last standing family member Tempest, causing her to become a Red Lantern. One of the coolest bits of character development for her, which allowed Mera to really tap into, I would say, years of bubbling rage. Talk about a woman and her power. During one page in Green Lantern issue number 50 from the 2005 volume of the series, Mera takes on the deceased Aquaman, and when he attempts to emotionally manipulate her to basically win her over, trying to distract her from her rage by attempting to bond with her over the loss of their son, ultimately it fails. Mera frightens him off masterfully by responding, "I've never wanted children," before seemingly defeating both of the undead that are confronting her here with her liquid napalm blood. Number 10. Jason Todd's worst fear. Probably one of the most heartbreaking moments for me in recent years in terms of DC Comics happened during Batman 3 Jokers, so pretty recently. I'm still not really sure why people don't like this comic. I thought the story by Jeff Johns and artist Jason Fabok was well worth the multi-year wait myself. It was suspenseful, it was mysterious, and it was just stunning, and honestly every time I go back to it I find something new that I like about it. Sure, the middle act in issue number 2 lagged a bit, but otherwise this comic to me was pretty flawless, other than a few minor plot hole issues in my opinion. Also the raccoon. And despite the lag in issue number 2, it still had one of the most heartbreaking moments for me, which occurred when Jason as Red Hood chose to strike out on his own and ended up finding a pool filled with failed attempts at creating the next Joker, which in and of itself is another kind of brutal. At one point, the 3 Jokers implied that Jason actually might be the best candidate to become the next Joker, but decide that he's simply not smart enough to take up the mantle. Ouch. Instead, they once more beat him to within an inch of his life with a crowbar, with one of the Jokers, implied to be the Joker who first did this to Jason way back when, commenting on how the second time was even more fun than the first. It gets especially brutal and heart-wrenching when Batgirl and Batman arrive on the scene to rescue him and he lashes out at them, especially when Babs just comes in and gives him a hug and she's like, I just want to make sure you're safe.
Number 9. The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Batman The Dark Knight Returns came to us originally as a way to give Batman, Bruce Wayne, a fitting end, and it's easily one of the greatest Batman stories out there, with Frank Miller art that was actually understandable and a great tale that wrapped up the character of Batman in a lovely little bow. But then, Frank Miller went and created 2 sequels, and the first of which is basically a fever dream of insanity, overly objectified blocky cartoon women, and just odd visuals, while also taking the character of Superman and completely misunderstanding and disrespecting him. But I think the most egregious moment came when Supes and the 3rd member of the Trinity, Wonder Woman, decided they were going to hook up, right after Batman beat the absolute snot out of the Man of Steel. Wonder Woman comes in to find Superman completely beaten and bloody and ranting about how it's all over, and then, after punching him for being weak, I guess, they immediately start making out. Then they fly up into the stratosphere and begin going at it midair, and then slamming into the ground, causing volcanic eruptions, massive earthquakes, and tsunamis, hurricane-level winds, all for Wonder Woman to say he moved the earth for her. Wow, so poetic. And then she exclaims she is pregnant now, and they decide to get a bite to eat, but they sure are heroic.
And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button? Helps us out, helps you to stay in the know, it's a win-win.
Click the subscribe button!
Do it!
God!
Number 8. Jason Todd loves Barbara Gordon. Another really brutal moment, possibly one of my least favorite parts, I think, of 3 Jokers, comes at the end. After taking Jason in and helping him to recover after he was attacked, Jason at one point attempts to kiss Barbara. It kind of makes a little bit of sense because, you know, they've got shared trauma, but this felt weirdly forced still and out of place to me because, you know, Babs still seems like she's kind of trying to be there for Jason like a sister. I get that Jason is reaching out because for years he's felt like he was left behind, abandoned, and, you know, like I said, they do have shared trauma, but Babs and Jason's relationship has always felt more platonic to me, and if anything, more than that, more familial. Like they were truly, you know, brother and sister. And when Babs reaches out, it's very clear she's coming from this place, and yet Jason seems to struggle to read the room and acts on his romantic feelings anyways, if that's even what's really going on for him. Honestly, I think he's just confused. The 3rd issue ends with a kind of weird note with Jason leaves on our apartment door, and that ends up falling off and then being swept away by the building's janitor, which is especially weird and kind of cringe because it seems to imply, like that whole sequence of shots, that if Babs found it, things may have been different between them. Other than Barbara having to once more reaffirm her boundaries with Jason, I don't see how it could have ended otherwise. What a strange romance subplot that I never expected nor ever really wanted. But hey, there it is.
Number 7. Jericho vs. Vigilante. Okay, so I did talk about this one for brutal villain defeats, but I had no idea this moment happened before, so if we're talking about brutal DC moments we never saw coming, this one for sure hits the mark for me. Joey Wilson, aka Jericho, is the son of the infamous assassin Deathstroke the Destroyer, but despite that fact, Jericho made almost every effort to be a hero, and he was one. He was even a member of the Teen Titans, the team that consistently stands against his own dad. Now Jericho has the ability, granted to him by the same method that granted his dad his abilities, to transfer his consciousness into the body of another using eye contact and take control of them, effectively possessing them. And it was pretty powerful. He could control some pretty strong beings. Unfortunately, every time he did this, a small shred of the individual psyche remained in his head. At first, it was nothing that he couldn't deal with, just 1 or 2 psyches, but over time, possessing multiple people, he had so many psyches floating through his head that it drove him insane. Now the rogue anti-hero known as Vigilante took on the responsibility of stopping Jericho, and where Vigilante originally planned to just go the quick route and completely end Jericho, Jericho's sister stood firm that her brother was a good person at heart and should not lose his life. Vigilante heard her out and decided to not deal with this threat in a lethal way. Instead, after Jericho was captured and in the back of a police vehicle, Vigilante paid the guy a visit and just completely took Jericho's eyes from his head. It eliminated the threat of Jericho's powers, sure, but I can probably think of a dozen different ways that this course of action could have been averted.
Number 6. Joker's payback. Seriously? The Joker? I mean, what is wrong with this guy? Another horrible moment that haunts me. In fact, this whole story haunts me, not just this one moment, which comes from Brian Azzarello's The Joker. This story follows Johnny Frost, who was tasked with going to pick up the Joker after he's been released from prison. Finally out of the clink, Joker returns to check up on some old friends and old businesses. One of his first stops is a bar and business where Harley Quinn has been dancing while he was away. Not appreciating that Harley has gotten involved in this kind of business, Joker decides to take it out on the man running the establishment by skinning him alive, much to Frost's horror. Although, to be honest, this is really only the beginning and things only get much worse from there, especially from Johnny's perspective.
Number 5. Abandoned at the altar. The wedding of Batman and Catwoman was a big frickin' deal. It was teased at and built up for a long time. Fans were genuinely excited to see it happen and to see what could come next after the fact. A kid of Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne, what would that be like? We've seen futures where they end up together, but sadly, the wedding that was so coveted never came to be. Batman issue 50 came and went, and following suit, so did Catwoman. Came and went from Bruce's life, literally leaving the groom at the altar. Not like permanently leaving his life, but kind of. Batman was marrying Catwoman so he could literally be happy, and after some convincing words from criminals like the Joker and her friend Holly, Catwoman believed that if Bruce Wayne was happy, then Batman couldn't be Batman, which, 1, that's depressing as hell, but 2, both the Joker and Holly, alongside Riddler, Gotham Girl, Flashpoint, Thomas Wayne, Batman, and other villains, were working for Bane, who was manipulating events in order to break Batman emotionally and give rise to the City of Bane event. Well, it certainly sent Batman down a path of absolute despair. He became much more drastic with his fighting of criminals, particularly an innocent Mr. Freeze, and he even donned a less advanced version of his batsuit so that he would take more of a beating. Like, come on. The guy's been through enough.
Number 4. The non-canonical made canon. One of the weirdest things with DC is how sometimes they just completely leave their stories open to being canon or not, kinda depending on how they're received by fans. And one of the weirdest incidents of this happening is with The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke, written by Alan Moore, was never intended by him to be part of the main continuity. And as far as I know, it kinda isn't really, except for one part of the story, the attack on Barbara Gordon, the pain she suffered, and the result of that attack, her becoming paralyzed from the waist down. Why this was the only thing we chose to keep from this story, I do not know, but the whole idea of it just feels super weird, especially when you consider how brutal and graphic this attack was, where Barbara gets no opportunity to defend herself, having been surprised by the Joker's visit while visiting her dad in her civilian form. This element of the story would change Barbara's life forever, and although I do like Babs as Oracle, and I feel like we're able to actually at least turn it into something good, it feels like she was kind of robbed of, some agency here, especially when you consider the story was never really intended to be incorporated into the canon, and it also still kinda wasn't.
Number 3. Maxwell Lord and Ted Cord. I made a rhyme. I think we can all agree that it's incredibly rare to see a mainline superhero taken out of the picture, and if it does happen, it's usually in a huge blaze of glory, or an incredibly tragic moment, or after a long momentous battle with cancer in the case of Marvel's Marvel. So, when Ted Cord was erased from existence thanks to a bullet from a barrel at the hands of Maxwell Lord in the Countdown to Infinite Crisis, it kinda sucked. After following Ted the whole book as he struggles for anyone in the Justice League to take him seriously, while he's correctly on the trail of Maxwell and learning of all his misuse of both the Justice League's files, Batman's Brother Eye satellite, and the OMAX, you'd expect Cord to come out surviving, having a cathartic moment where he finally gets the League's respect or to make a dent in Lord's plans, but instead he gets snuffed out like a tea light candle that never even begun to make the wax melt. It's abrupt, brutal, and it made me legitimately very sad to read it.
Number 2. Face Off. One of the most brutal moments that still haunts me to this day, of course, involves the Joker. Because of course he's one of the most twisted and often brutal characters that we have over at DC, I would say. This one comes to us from around the time of Death of the Family. In this story, Joker ended up removing his face in order to reinvent himself. Needless to say, this didn't last forever, but it was a terrifying time, and honestly, I'm not sure how Joker lived after doing this, considering that I'm pretty sure he would have been opening himself up to all kinds of nasty infections. Despite removing his face, Joker would later recover and somehow reapply said face, despite the fact that the face was not well stored in between, cause comics, I guess. Ugh.
Number 1, fridged. This DC Comics brutal moment caused the whole coining of a term and changed the way comic books were written going forward. Green Lantern Kyle Rayner came home one day after doing his superhero thing in Green Lantern issue number 54 from 1994 to find his then girlfriend, photojournalist Alexandra DeWitt, had been very savagely stripped of her life at the hands of the villain known as Major Force. But not only did Major Force take Alexandra's life, but for seemingly no reason, he also stuffed her into the couple's fridge. It was incredibly brutal and served only to give Kyle, the male antagonist of the story, the motivation to reach new heights as a hero, while her character, who was genuinely likable and could stand on her own, was gone forever. This was a trope in not only comics but media in general, that presented viewers and readers with the idea of sacrificing the female love interest for the direct purpose of motivating the male hero, which practically never happened in the reverse. After this comic came out, the trope was finally given a name: fridging, or women in refrigerators, and it changed the way female characters were written in comics for the most part. Going forward.
At number 10 is the iconic Joker removing his own face and then wearing it around like a mask, like the loony he is. In the DC Faces of the Unalive and the Unaliving of the Family, sorry for that, it's YouTube, not me, Joker did something so bizarre it left me scratching my own face. You see, he sliced off his. Yeah, you heard me right, he took a knife to his own visage and then proceeded to wear it like a mask. At first, I thought it was just a gimmicky, shock factor move, but the more I delved into it, the more I realized the deeper connotations here. You see, while it would be easy to chalk this up as Joker being insane, this was actually Joker's deranged way of trying to make a point. You see, he used his own face, lack thereof, as a metaphor for Batman's alter ego. You see, just as Batman's real face is the mask he wears, the Joker's mask is his real face. He was taunting Batman, saying, "Look, we're not so different, you and I. My mask is my identity, just like yours." Sure, the Joker's done some gruesome things, but this self-inflicted facial mutilation takes the cake. At number 9 is Black Adam's brutalities. We all know how capable Black Adam is, considering he's basically Superman without the remorse. But there are two standout instances that really take the cake for me. The first is the time he lacerated Terra Man in half. You see, instead of a warning or a good old-fashioned beatdown, no, he rips Terra Man straight in two in front of the press cops. It's absolutely horrendous. Seriously, talk about making a point. And if you thought that was intense, hold on a second, because in Infinite Crisis, Black Adam takes down the notorious Psycho Pirate. How? By jamming his fingers right through the guy's mask and into his eyes, pushing the mask through his face entirely. I'm talking about a classic Three Stooges move turned into a seriously lethal attack. Forget heroes don't unalive people. Black Adam doesn't play by those rules. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. I would really appreciate it if you did. Thank you very much. At number 8, Damian Wayne begs his mom to call off the hounds. Oh boy. Damian Wayne has faced some seriously gruesome moments. Despite his age, it doesn't seem to stop the writers from putting him through the ringer. One of the most shocking moments was when he suffered a brutal beatdown, got lit up with bullets, thrown out of a window, and then to top it all off, he was impaled with a freaking sword, all in succession. Come on, that's some next level brutality. And here's the kicker, it was all on the orders of his own mother, Talia al Ghul. Could you imagine that? Your own mom giving the green light for such a horrific ordeal. The most agonizing bit for me out of this whole thing was watching Damian desperately plead with his mom to call off the dogs. That's the most gut-wrenching part right there. But don't worry, you guys, T got better. It's comic books. At number 7, pre-Robin Damian beheading a small-time villain, sticking a grenade in his mouth, and then throwing the whole thing at Tim Drake. Considering the last entry, we know that this guy's carrying trauma. Back in Batman number 656, Damian was introduced as a lethal assassin, hell-bent on proving that he's the only worthy successor to his father, Batman. He targeted Tim Drake, the then Robin, and Bruce's adopted son. See, Damian, raised as an assassin, thought that he had what it takes to be the Bat. But when he took on Spook, a kind of lower ranking villain, he definitely went overboard. See, he didn't just stop at knocking out the bad guys, he absolutely decapitated this one. Pretty cold. And then, to add a cherry on top of the brutal sundae, he stuffed a grenade in Spook's severed noggin and then hurled the thing at fellow Robin Tim Drake. Talk about family drama. At number 6 are the Hunters 2. From the pages of DC Animal Men emerges a spine-tingling and utterly gruesome moment that makes you question the limits of what can happen in the comic world. We're talking about the Hunters using a man as their puppet. Picture this, a nightmarish spider-like entity straight out of a horror movie, seizing control over an unsuspecting poor man's body, contorting it into a grotesque pudding-like human puppet. That's like Cronenberg-esque. This shadowy and malevolent figure have an eerie modus of operandi. You see, they remain hidden in plain sight, inhabiting human bodies, going incognito, and lurking within them like unseen predators until the opportune moment strikes. The Animal Man's narrative is certainly gripping, but I'd advise against chowing down on a juicy roast beef sandwich while delving into this particular story, because this mind-bending moment serves as a stark reminder that within the pages of DC Comics, the boundaries between fiction and sheer horror can blur in the most unimaginable ways. At number 5, the Joker skinned a man alive. Now, we all know that the Joker's brutality knows no bounds, and one chilling moment that still sends shivers down our spines is when he skinned this dude alive. This nightmarish act was unleashed in his very own graphic novel, a tale that exists on the fringes of DC's canonical universe. Set in a neo-noir ambience, it depicts the Joker's ascent to power after his release from Arkham Asylum. The horrifying sequence begins when a former henchman named Monty foolishly hires Harley Quinn as a dancer in his club. The Joker, infuriated by this act of disloyalty, takes Monty to the darkest depths of cruelty. He skins him alive and then drags this hapless man onto the stage, forcing him to be unalived before a horrified audience. This gruesome moment, although not canon, is a chilling reminder of the Joker's unrestrained malevolence. It's the kind of raw, disturbing scene that would never make it into a PG-13 movie, and for good reason. What other nightmarish Joker moments do you think are too brutal for the big screen? Share your thoughts down in the comments below. Definitely not this one. At number 4, Joker beats Jason Todd with a crowbar. The Joker, the ultimate thorn in Batman's side, has had his fair share of brutal moments, but one that still haunts fans is when he took the life of the second Robin, Jason Todd. He didn't just stop at a typical brawl, he went all in, using a crowbar mercilessly to beat Jason, and then he left him in a warehouse that was rigged to explode, reducing Robin to smithereens. Batman, in his unwavering pursuit of justice, not revenge, tried to apprehend the Joker, but the crown prince of crime at the time was acting as the ambassador to Iran, granting him diplomatic immunity, which meant no charges for the heinous act. The loss of Jason was a permanent scar on Batman's legacy, as Jason's resurrection brought on a new persona, the Red Hood, a vigilante with the lethal edge and a strained relationship with the Caped Crusader. The Joker's twisted victory endures as one of the most brutal and lasting moments in DC's history. At number 3, Solomon Grundy plucks off Red Tornado's arm. The Red Tornado, a unique character in his own right, had long yearned for the chance to experience life as a human with sensations and emotions. His wish was finally granted when he gained a real human body. It was a moment of triumph, a chance to feel warmth and love he'd never experienced before, as he was formerly an android, but his newfound humanity came at a staggering cost. You see, Solomon Grundy, the hulking and formidable adversary, is not known for his subtlety or his kindness. In a moment of ruthless aggression, he seized the opportunity presented by Red Tornado's mortal state, and with shocking brutality, Grundy unceremoniously ripped off Reddy's arm as if it were nothing more than just an unwanted weed. The visual impact of this act was hauntingly violent, even by the standards of mainstream superhero comics. Reddy's arm dangled by a thread with bones exposed and all kinds of bodily fluids spilling, creating a disturbing and graphic tableau. It was a stark reminder that the world of DC is quite far from PG. At number 2, Sobek chomps on Osiris. Now you'd think that comic books always end on a high note, but sometimes these inked pages are stained with moments so brutal you won't believe they happened. Case in point, the shocking twist in New 52's number 43 that saw Sobek, a seemingly dopey alligator man, convincing his buddy Osiris to ditch his godly form. And if you thought this act of trust wasn't going to end in complete tragedy, think again. Sobek goes full National Geographic on Osiris. He bites him clean in half. Imagine watching Animal Planet and the show takes a twisted gory turn for the worse. See, Sobek wasn't just a hungry reptile, he was a cunning, scheming backstabber with a plan. He was out to take down the Black Adam family from within, so the lesson learned from this jaw-dropping moment, never trust an alligator man, especially when it comes to your godly self. At number 1, Superman punches his arm straight through the Joker. In the demented alternate reality of Injustice Gods Among Us, we bore witness to one of the most jaw-dropping and brutal moments in DC history. It all started when the Joker, that iconic villain with the penchant for chaos, hatched a nefarious plot to drive Superman to the brink of madness. He used a potent substance to trick the Man of Steel into believing that Lois Lane, the love of his life, was in fact the monstrous and destructive force known as Doomsday. But here's where it gets really twisted. The Joker, ever the mastermind, rigged a nuclear bomb to detonate at the moment Lois's heart ceased to beat. And tragically, that very same scenario unfolded when Superman, under the influence of Joker's deception, inadvertently took Lois's life. This plunged Superman into a state of profound grief and despair that defies imagination, as Lois happened to be with Superman's son. In a shocking and horrifying turn of events, a distraught Superman, consumed by grief and rage, crashed down to Earth, and in a display of unfathomable brutality, he plunged his arm straight through the Joker's chest, ending the Clown Prince of Crime's life in a cold-blooded act of vengeance. Batman, who had always tried to hold Superman back from crossing the line, watched in stunned silence, unable to intervene. This act of violence was no mere accident or fit of anger. It was a calculated part of the Joker's diabolical plan to break the Man of Steel, to transform him into something unrecognizable, and it succeeded. In the aftermath of this brutal act, the once heroic Superman was shattered and left in ruins, becoming a tyrannical ruler on Earth, a shadow of his former self.
Coming in at number 10 is Zur-En-Arrh. The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh was introduced in 1958's Batman number 113 as Tlano, who protects a faraway planet in a red, yellow, and purple Batman-inspired suit. While a dazed Batman pilots the Batplane over Gotham City one night, he finds himself transported to the world of Zur-En-Arrh by Tlano. Bruce helps Tlano fight off alien invaders with Superman-like powers, and it's transported back to Earth. Now, fast forward to Grant Morrison's run on Batman, and the whole adventure was revealed to be a hallucination caused by an isolation experiment on Bruce Wayne by the villain Dr. Simon Hurt, with Zur-En-Arrh being derived from Bruce Wayne mistaking his father's last words, Zorro in Arkham, the film they had just watched before his parents were brutally snatched away from him. Using the trigger phrase, Dr. Hurt broke Bruce's mind and left him on the streets of Gotham. However, Bruce had developed a backup personality to bring the fight back to Dr. Hurt, the much more violent Batman of Zur-En-Arrh. And at number 9 is Batman White Knight. Batman White Knight does something rather unique. It takes the arch enemy of Batman, the Joker, and flips him to become the hero of Gotham, but not one that wears a mask or runs around beating up criminals in the night. A hero who stands in the public eye and fights for what's right. Mostly. The story really paints Batman out to be as brutal and terrifying as he tries to be, and it's pretty successful. The best example I can give is how the Joker actually became reformed in the first place. In the very first issue of the comic, Batman is chasing Joker alongside Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, and Nightwing, and he is single-minded, driving the Batmobile over people's roofs and through active construction zones, barging past security guards who just want to help. Normally Batman is pretty good at not letting the Joker talk him into a frenzy, but this time it ain't gonna go that well. When Joker torments Batman, then reveals he is taking a new medication to cure his mental illness, Batman snatches the whole bottle, and in front of a large group of onlookers, he empties the whole bottle into the Joker's mouth and forces him to swallow it. Number 8. Bane. There are many deranged and off-the-wall villains in Batman's rogues gallery, and while the Dark Knight has suffered losses and defeats at the hands of a few, none of those defeats are as infamous as the ones he suffered at the hands of Bane. By issue 11 of the Broken Bat part of the Nightfall arc, Bane had managed to find out that Bruce Wayne was indeed Batman. Bane surprised Bruce at his home, pumped himself with venom, and laid a brutal beatdown on the Dark Knight in his own home. The fight continued on into the Batcave, and completely taken by surprise, Batman is on his last legs when the venom-fueled tank of a man lifted Batman over his head and dropped him spine first onto his massive back-breaking knee. This brutal move, captured in one of the most iconic comic panels ever, put the Batman completely out of commission, requiring him to choose another to fill his role as the protector of Gotham until he could make his triumphant return. Coming up at number 7, Alfred. Bane broke the Dark Knight's back all the way back in Nightfall, but I think it was his attempt to break Batman's spirit that was the most despicably brutal moment for this character. After Flashpoint Batman organized a takeover of the city of Gotham, Batman and his Bat family were forced out of the city. Its perimeter was guarded, and Alfred Pennyworth was taken as a hostage. In an attempt to rescue Alfred, Batman sent Damian Wayne Robin. Unfortunately, Damian was not quite capable of getting the job done, but that doesn't mean that he deserved to be forced to watch as Bane snapped the neck of Alfred Pennyworth, sending the heart of the Bat family to his grave. Instead of actually serving to break the Batman spirit like he intended to, Bane actually pushed Batman to do practically whatever it takes to put Bane down. If anything, this act united the Bat family as a force to be reckoned with, and there was no way Bane or the alternate Thomas Wayne were going to get away with this heinous crime. And at number 6 is his one rule. Batman Hush could in its entirety be seen as a brutal moment. It strikes at the childhood life of Bruce Wayne himself, pushing Batman to a point we rarely ever see. In Batman issue number 614, right smack dab in the middle of the Hush story arc, Tommy Elliot, the childhood friend of Bruce Wayne, loses his life at what seems to be the hands of the Joker. All the years and years of distress caused by the Joker, the people hurt, the lives lost, they all fuel this rage inside of Bruce Wayne, who begins to lay a spectacular beatdown on the Joker, knocking out both Harley Quinn and even Catwoman, who both try to stop him. Batman almost goes to the point of permanently bringing an end to the Joker, beginning to put aside his morals to finally be rid of this homicidal plague on Gotham City. It's not until Jim Gordon intervenes while Batman has his gloves around the Joker's neck that the Dark Knight finally relents. The worst part is that if Batman did go through with it, the Joker wasn't even the one responsible for the crime he thought he was responsible for. Number 5, The Heretic. The 2012 volume of Batman Incorporated is full of some just bizarre moments. This is happening at a time when Batman has taken on his newfound son, Damian Wayne, as his Robin. The relationship is strenuous at best. It's bound to happen when the dad is a brooding, unemotionally available masked man who runs around beating up criminals, and the surprise son, who was raised to be one of the deadliest assassins in the world, is dumped on Batman by a woman who had chemically manipulated him into conceiving the kid in the first place, if you know what I mean. While these two were trying to find a balance in their relationship, Talia al Ghul, the aforementioned mother, initiated a plot to take over Gotham alongside her organization and with a massive hulking bodyguard called the Heretic. Spoilers for a story that is about 10 years old, but the Heretic is actually a clone of Damian Wayne himself, and he is terrifying. For starters, he was literally grown inside the belly of a whale, which, what? But in some of his most brutal moments, Heretic ties a group of hostages to a massive boulder and then throws the boulder down a flight of stairs. He quite literally single-handedly takes the life of Knight and fights off members of Batman Incorporated using the hero's body as a weapon. But when he comes face to face with Damian Robin and Nightwing, he takes out Nightwing in one move, and although Robin actually puts up a really good fight, Heretic still runs him through with a massive sword, bringing the end for Batman's son. Number 4, Vampire Batman. When Dracula comes to Gotham, a good vampire grants Batman the vampiric gift in order to take on Dracula himself. And the idea was so awesome that it became a whole brutal trilogy. Starting with Red Rain, then Bloodstorm, and ending in Batman Crimson Mist. All of which put the most obvious hero to become a vampire in one of the best Victorian horror styles, and with the most terrifying looks I have ever seen for the Dark Knight. In the first novel, Red Rain, the hero wipes out the vampires and Dracula, although he is transformed into a vampire himself at the end, which means we get to see Batman take on crime using the powers of a vampire in the next novel, Bloodstorm. He does his bestest to resist the darker aspects of being a vampire, but that all goes south when Batman lashes out and drains the Joker's blood after the Joker ended the life of Catwoman. Batman has Alfred and Gordon stake him through the heart, putting Batman into a catatonic state. A state that he is then revived from in Batman Crimson Mist, when criminals took over Gotham in his absence. This time around, the Vampire Knight is almost completely animalistic now thanks to his isolation. A bloodthirsty vampire Batman quickly wipes out most of his enemies in brutal form, drinking their blood in the process until he is finally put to rest by Alfred, Gordon, Two-Face, and Killer Croc, who all go with him to the grave. Number 3. Arkham Asylum. One of the great things about Batman compared to any other hero is the way his comics can lean really heavily on the darker aspects of human beings, and because of that they can also get away with much more expressionistic art that can be really gorgeous while also being completely terrifying. As example, let's talk about Arkham Asylum. The gritty gothic artwork, which looks like it came straight out of my nightmares, meshes with the extremely dark, disturbing, supernatural themes of the story to take what is essentially just Batman going to work to secure Arkham Asylum into a brutal, mind-twisting funhouse ride. It's terrifying. Batman takes on some of his most well-known foes, but the fights aren't the compelling part. It's the sheer freakiness of it all. The real brutality of this story comes in its horror and the dark past of Arkham Asylum itself, which is slowly drip-fed to us as we make our way through the pages and pages of the most terrifying Joker I have ever seen. And at number 2, All-Star Batman. Remember before when I said that Batman puts the most brutal beatdowns on his opponents? Well, let's talk about a group of thugs in the All-Star Batman and Robin series, specifically issue number 7. Written by Frank Miller, we can expect that this Batman will be a little bit rougher around the edges, but I don't think any of us ever expected him to be like this. In fact, this whole series is full of brutal Batman moments that honestly make him feel like a totally different character. I have talked about this before, and thank you Rodney for informing me of this, but in the opening pages of issue number 7, Batman comes speeding into a group of armed thugs, foot first, laughing like the Joker and talking in his head about how Gotham is full of cockroaches. He's basically delighted at the fact that the criminals are so scared that they are accidentally disposing of each other. But then, on top of all of that, he sets fire to a bottle of bleach and tosses it onto the criminals, blanketing them in fire. And then he continues beating the snot out of them while they're getting crispy. This is no longer the Batman. There's no way, but wait, there's more. Because Black Canary then pops up out of nowhere and these two superheroes just start making out and getting busy while the thugs are barbecuing in the background. It's messed up. And finally, in at number 1, his parents. Everyone and their moms knew this was going to be on the list. It's the whole reason Batman is Batman. The tragic passing of Thomas and Martha Wayne at the hands of Joe Chill remains the defining moment in Batman's life. It's brought up so often that you think it's basically his whole personality, and in a way, it actually kinda is. The loss of his parents has informed almost everything he has done going forward, from his decision to even become Batman, to the fact that he has such weird father-child relationships with his wards. He has paid multiple visits to Joe Chill to try and teach the man the error of his ways, and to show him what he created. He's almost constantly reminded of their loss, if not by villains who know the truth, then by his own Bat family. Bruce Wayne may have grown up to become one of the greatest detectives and superheroes in the world, but he will pretty much always just be the scared little boy in an alleyway mourning the loss of his parents. And that sucks.